and if you'd like, we could possibly just talk a little bit about how we got into Rust to get you familiar with who we are. Sure. So I'll say a little bit about my. When Rust came out, I was really into. We could have covered a little bit about Rust, what Rust is. Let me back up one moment. I know some of you are well familiar with Rust. Rust is a systems programming language. It's been developed by Mozilla expressly for the purpose of fixing the flaws in Firefox that occur in very large-scale C++ code bases. So Firefox, it's a web browser, and web browsers are exposed to basically the entire surface area of the internet. They're a major attack vector, and it's a constant battle to keep them working correctly. And a large part of the problem there just has to do with how horribly difficult it is to maintain C++ at a large scale. Basically, it's just impossible to wrangle all the seg faults, and seg faults translate directly to security vulnerabilities. So Rust is basically a project to kind of rethink how we develop system software in a way that's like systemically correct and isn't subject to entire classes of security vulnerabilities. As a bonus, Rust also happens to be the fastest programming language in the world, and I will back that up. It's basically sufficient to understand what Rust is all about. All right, so I got into Rust in 2010 because I was into Scala, and I wanted to learn how to write a compiler. And Scala was pretty hot at the time, and it was really cool because it was introducing functional concepts into imperative and object-oriented languages. And that was also what attracted me about Rust, because Rust was also showing a strong influence from the ML family. But Rust at the time, so when I tried to get into Scala, Scala was already a huge established project. I just couldn't find the right vector to make meaningful contributions. It just seemed really intimidating. So I did manage to get one patch into some concurrency library. But when Rust came out, I saw that it was just like a wide open field, and this was like doing really cool things that were really appealing to me. So I immediately jumped in, and just like Rust was horrible at the time. It barely worked. You couldn't write a single Rust program without crashing. Like it literally took like 10 iterations to come up with the right formulation to make Rust work. So that presented a very fertile opportunity to kind of go crazy finding a place for myself. And from then on, I just sort of like, at every step of the way, it's just like, what is the most critical thing that's not happening in Rust? And then I go tackle that, sort of build up a culture of handling that problem, hand it off to other people, and then move on. And since then, that's basically been my MO the whole time. And it's worked out really well. I feel like I really have a place in Rust, and I'm really proud of what we've accomplished. I'll let Alex speak a little bit of his Rust experience.
Sure. So I was a little later than Brian. I'm not quite back. Brian is one of the oldest Rust developers on record. Number 2?
Of the current?
Of the 2?
Currently at Rust development, number 2 by a few months.
But so I started in late 2012. I was a senior in college, and I was just looking for a project to do over winter break. And I decided to port one of the compilers I had written for a class at Carnegie Mellon over to Rust, and that turned out to be a disaster because a very buggy language, not knowing the language, it was a lot of fun. But the first thing I ever did, I remember very crisply, was a bug in the bit vector library in the standard library. And I found this, and I was like, oh, this is why the compiler's not working. This is why I have all these bugs. So I created a patch. I checked out the code, and it seemed to work all right. And I was absolutely terrified to post a PR for this, because like, what if they didn't mean for this method to do this? What if they intended this behavior? But so I posted that up, and they were like, oh my god, right, that's a dumb mistake, and they merged it instantly. And I was like, oh, well, that was easy. Maybe they can keep doing some more. And it kind of just snowballed from there. Right out of college, that was about January, so I graduated in May. I had been contributing more and more up to that point. And then I worked in another company for a little bit, but then a position on Rust opened up. I applied for it and got into Rust, and I've kind of snowballed ever since then. So I started off very, very small and kind of just ramped up more and more contributions over time. I personally had not a whole lot of experience with open source ahead of that. I had, like Brian, done little dabblings here and there. I think my first open source contribution was a commit to RSpec back in like 2005 or something. That was a long time ago. But yeah, and nowadays I like Brian, I'm quite proud of where we are with Rust itself, and I feel like we've done an amazing job. We had no idea where we were coming from 3 years ago, and we never could have seen where we currently are. But yeah, so I think we'll probably have this be relatively free-form now at this point. So Brian can go over a list of topics again if you want. But otherwise, if you guys have questions about open source, about Rust, or anything, feel free to ask. I don't know if we have microphones to go around, but it's kind of...
I'll find a microphone.
If nobody has questions, I will interview Alex.
Are there any questions for now? Or should we start over? Yeah. Yeah.
Check.
Yeah. I don't know who that was.
Okay. What does the dev team look like at Rust? And how much would you say you depend on non-employed contributors for Rust?
Great question, Barrett.
Maybe you shouldn't use this.
Just that one.
So in Rust, one of the really exciting and distinguishing characteristics of Rust and notable characteristics is that the great majority of the development effort actually comes from the community. The Rust team is quite small, unfortunately so, but it's really inspiring how much of Rust has actually been directly created by students, just ambitious students trying to sort of make a path for themselves. And really, one of the most exciting aspects of Rust is seeing all those students just sort of find a place for themselves in the project, make a name for themselves, and go on to like an interesting career based on their experience with Rust. And I'm really hopeful that this will kind of seed the next generation of systems programmers with these sort of Rusty inclinations. And I'm really hopeful that we're going to kind of make some big changes in how people think about software because of that. I don't remember the other aspects of your question, but I hope that was somewhat enlightening.
So one thing that I would add to that is that the dynamic of Rust development has very much changed over time. When I first started, it was much more kind of, we were the ones implementing these various large language features and library features, all that good stuff. But over time, as the community has grown beyond what we ever could have imagined, we've gotten to the point where a large part of our job nowadays is kind of architecting the project and architecting the direction we're going to kind of make areas for everyone to slot in. So it's kind of, we help provide the direction, and then the actual manpower, the kind of workforce behind it actually comes from the community just naturally. So we'll just kind of create a roadmap, and then out of the woodwork, tons of developers will come out and start pushing all these things forward. And then we're there to help review and do the various design aspects, but over time, we're kind of weaning down, not necessarily intentionally, just kind of coincidentally on the actual development work itself.
I want to say a few more things about the structure of the Rust team, what's changed over time. So when Rust started, projects grow. We have to kind of just constantly adapt to the current situation, whatever comes up. When Rust started, it's a very small project. Coordination is small. There's really kind of no formal processes at all. And a lot of my early commits are basically me just submitting my own PRs and approving them. And my secret, if you look at my GitHub stats, in my first 2 years, it's just like I made thousands and thousands of commits, and I'm the #1 contributor. And it's basically just because I like make tiny commits and just approve them myself. But it's sort of team structure, right? So over time, you have to establish more and more lines of communication. And we hit the point, maybe like a year before 1.0 or shortly before 1.0, where we realized our processes just weren't scaling at all. And we had to sort of start thinking about project governance in a serious way. Because a big problem you run into in large and exciting and growing open source projects is managing discontent. And when your process is bad, it creates a lot of unhappiness and frustration stemming from people just not understanding what's going on. You really have to focus a lot on communication. So at that point, we created a sort of formal structure for the Rust project where we have teams. And those teams are all sort of siloed into their own areas. And today, the way this is set up is that we have a core team. So they go through this small number of people who have a big role in the project, a big influence in the project, and we're relatively on the same wavelength about the direction of the project. And then we have a bunch of area-specific teams that are responsible for things like the language design, the implementation of the compiler, the tooling, the documentation. And those teams are really responsible for the actual implementation of what's going on in those areas. The core team doesn't get a whole lot involved in that anymore, just because, again, you have some divided responsibilities, just like any large organization. So the core team, as Alex was saying, increasingly is sort of just like getting together and like reviewing what is going on all over the place and taking a big picture view and trying to herd cats. You're either steering sort of through social processes. Like you have no actual authority to tell anybody to do anything in these projects. You're sort of leading by example, just like trying to set a good, positive environment where everybody understands the direction and feels that they have a way to contribute to the direction. And that sort of keeps the project. So far, that is a successful strategy for keeping this large project moving in a consistent direction. Anything about a question?
Anyone else? Yeah.
I guess, what has been the largest pain point, other than just when the compiler didn't work, when you swapped from maybe a different systems language to Rust? Since Rust was originally designed to solve a very specific problem, I guess were there either features that are useful? I guess I was looking at, for example, the unsafe memory doesn't currently have a memory model, or at least there's a discussion on trying to standardize that. So kind of when you're moving from one systems language into the new age Rust, what features are missing, or what is something they've been wanting to get implemented?
All right, so I think I'll just try to speak a little bit about the journey of discovering what Rust was and how it sort of fulfilled the requirements of the system language. Because Rust changed a lot over time. Originally, the idea was basically do what Firefox used to do as a systems language. But exactly what that meant was wildly different than what it is today. Basically, when Rust was announced, it was go with a stronger type system. It is a green threading system, and it had actor-oriented, basically, with CSV style message passing. So there was a long process of just realizing like the design decisions that were sort of impeding Rust's own goals with Firefox, but also sort of impeding Rust finding its niche in the world. Because if we had ended up being competing with Jeopardy, we would have just been of course. So as we went on, as we got experience with Firefox, we realized that the green threading runtime was a big problem. And technically, the reason the green threading runtime is a big problem is because of FFI issues. I can't go into it extensively, but when you cross from the green threads back into the random normal threads, there's a big marshalling step, a big context switch that is not as bad as a kernel context switch, but still, when you're in a tight loop in a system language and you go as fast as possible, it's just untenable. So the first major technical challenge we had in Rust was realizing we made a mistake there and transitioning away from green thread runtime into a normal threading system. And that took years probably. And it was a very, very slow process of realizing that we had made that mistake. People telling us you made a mistake, you made a mistake, you made a mistake over and over and over again. And really, that's a very important thing to understand in the project, that things are dynamic, the situation changes, and the decision made in the past may not be right for what happens in the future. And that's actually one of the things I'm kind of proud of for us, is that we're always kind of willing to step back and take people seriously and reevaluate those decisions. So we had to move away from green threading runtime. And the way we did that is we were not willing to let go of the green threading runtime at first. We said, okay, we're going to compromise. We're going to have two models to work with. We're going to be able to do green threading, we're going to be able to do native threading. It's just going to work. Of course, it didn't work because even with that, there's some abstraction packs. The abstraction packs there was kind of weird because we basically had a dynamic dispatch on the entire runtime. It was just working. When we did I/O, we had to do some virtual dispatch, and it caused a bunch of work for us, basically. And so then the next year, we had to just rip out the green thing. We had the regular one. But that was like probably the biggest refactoring project we've ever had for us, like converting the entire runtime. I think it was like another big technical challenge we had, something like that. We talked about.
So another kind of major development hurdle that we hit along the way, which was another case or textbook example of this whole idea of our previous decisions were totally upended over like the last year of development because they were no longer relevant. It was when the Rust language does not have an int or a uint type, like that literal string int and uint, and it did long ago, and it was a very, very long debate in figuring out like what do we actually want to call the integers, how do we even approach integer sizes in Rust, how do you even approach integer sizes in systems programming in general? And so we had a lot of discussions there. That was a very telling, at least I found it a relatively difficult time as well, kind of having to unlearn years of Rust that I personally had in preparation for kind of all the new people come on with Rust later and not have to fix all that. So I would say like along the difficulty aspect, it wasn't so much kind of what I felt Rust was missing, because at least from the beginning I always felt Rust for myself was always suitable and everything, but as you go along we tried to add things which existing users didn't like, and we tried to take things out which existing users wanted. So it always ended up trying to balance that, and then to plan that over the scale of many years was very interesting and required a lot of tactics. I don't know if that answers your question.
I don't remember the original question, but I'd like to speak a little bit about another major growing pain experience in Rust. So I was just talking about the technical problem, but the other big thing that I can think of that was a major hurdle for us was social problem. Just dealing with personalities and learning how to treat people respectfully in a way that keeps them engaged and doesn't cause them to kind of go crazy and be destructive. Because people come in all types, and especially in the internet, you're going to encounter all of them. And we had one really, really, really painful episode pretty early on where we had a contributor that was just out of control. We really made a campaign of destruction across Rust. It was stressful and painful for everybody involved. The way we dealt with it was not good. So at the time, this was sort of at the same time we were going through that big technical design problem of figuring out the Rust runtime. And this person was a major advocate of moving away from green threading to native threading, and had been for a long time. And honestly, we credit him with being the person who drove us to that decision. But at the same time, he was a difficult person to work with for his own reasons. And at the time, we just didn't have the experience or understanding to know how to handle that kind of personality. And we kind of, even though he was disrespectful to us a lot, we were also disrespectful to him in ignoring him or being dismissive of his opinions. And a lot of that was just because we were not mature enough at the time to understand that even when people are being disrespectful for you, you should be respectful of them because even if that doesn't change them, it at least sets the precedent for the leadership of the project and knows how to behave, and knows how to set the stage for good, positive interaction in the project. So what happened with him was that we had a number of events that just got increasingly more and more nasty, where he would go on a forum and propose some things he wanted to achieve the project, but his language was just incredibly dirty and mean. And he would respond in a fairly heavy-handed way. He wouldn't try to be mean. He would be like, "This is inappropriate. You need to stop doing this, or you're going to be asked to leave." That kind of thing. It was just set him off even further. Angry people are going to be angry. And eventually, there was a gigantic event where he posted a big forum thread and called out a bunch of core Rust developers. And he got a lot of support because he's very technically adept. He has a lot of good points. This is kind of a common failure in OSS, in that you have very brilliant people with core social skills, and technical leadership pulls a lot of weight. You can get stuff done. In a lot of scenarios, that is what matters. But I would definitely suggest that that is not what is the most important. The most important thing in collaboration, both in open source software and any professional life, is the ability to collaborate professionally and politely with the people. Technical skills just don't matter. If you're going to be poisoned with a project, you're not working around. So this person created a big thread, called out a bunch of people, got a lot of support. There's a lot of names going back and forth. And eventually he was just asked to leave the project and banned. It's the only time we've ever done that. This was before we kind of had all of our infrastructure set up for dealing with people in a sort of systemic way. And that was kind of the thing that's caused us to say, like, okay, our governance is messed up. I think that's probably the sum of that answer. We take some questions.
I think there was another part to his question, which was what made you look at Rust for the first time? So, I don't know.
Just pain points in switching.
Oh, okay.
So fully answered.
I would like to know that then. What made you, say, in my own personal project, C++ is not enough, or Go doesn't have the breadth of feature set that I need.
Oh man, I have my answer for this is so when I was at Carnegie Mellon as a senior and junior year, I was TAing the OS course there. So I TA'd a whole bunch of courses. This was where you had to write a kernel from scratch in C. And this was notoriously one of the hardest courses at CMU. Very few people actually got into the course, and then actually getting past the course was even fewer. And being a TA for 4 semesters on this, you get a first-hand experience of kind of all the difficulties that everyone's having with this. And so I had these past 2 years of experience of kind of, these are all the things that are going wrong. These are all the mistakes that everyone's making. These are all the pitfalls that people are falling into. And honestly, they're relative. Solutions are available. There are paradigms to fix all these things. And so when I first started looking into Rust, I kind of came at it with this eye of, I've been working a lot with students and kernels. I also worked historically at Ruby and Rails and very high-level things. And when Go had just come out, so I was kind of looking at that as well. But seeing the promise of Rust, of giving you all this power of C and C++, giving the ability to still write a kernel, but yet immediately preventing all of these insanely, these silly bugs which no one should ever have to run into, because someone should have, only a few people need to actually worry about this and take care of it. But everyone kept repeating it, all the same mistakes over in C. So seeing a language that just completely eliminates all these problems and would kind of unlock this ability for everyone to be far more productive and not have to worry about all these mundane details, that's what really excited me originally. Now, the original Rust that I saw was actually totally unsuitable for writing kernels, but nowadays we actually go to that point.
I don't think I have a whole lot to add to that, but I can also say that the thing that is so attractive about Rust is not having to write C and C++ ever again. C and C++, they're old languages with old techniques. There's been so much learning about PL since then. If you look at all the popular languages in the last decade and a half, they're mostly just way more pleasant than C and C++. So it's just time to move on. If I think about what is appropriate for Rust when I'm writing a new project, and whether it's appropriate for Rust, I would basically today I would never ever consider writing C or C++ unless it was a requirement from above, or possibly if I had to target a microcontroller that has no support from Rust yet, but those are few and far between at this point. It's just I'm not even go so far as to say that for projects with a public interfacing and with serious distribution, it might be irresponsible at this point to even consider C and C++. It's just the security bugs are horrible, horrible, horrible stuff. I mean, you saw the bugs this week probably. Every time one of these horrible bugs hits HackIllinois, like Heartbleed or whatever, all these cool name bugs, we look at it and say, would Rust have stopped this? And the answer is almost always like, yeah, that would have happened to Rust. So security code should not be written in C and C++ these days. I mean, for the immediate future, culturally, it will continue to be, and people like Google will do the heroics to make it work. But for new projects where you have the luxury, Rust is really better. No. I have no further answers to that question. You can take some more.
Does anyone else have a question?
What have been the best and worst, I guess, social processes that you guys have when it comes to software? Like some of the best. You talked about one of the best failures, but can you talk about best failure? And the worst failures you guys have with social process. Can you talk about where you guys have succeeded and how that can be applied outside of open source and outside of Rust?
Well, I think one of the best examples that I know of is that we have had an entirely new language feature which none of us even cared about, but on the core team was totally pioneered, implemented, and designed by a community member, and it was entirely driven by the community, and that was it. We had almost no effort in implementing a major new language feature, which is going to be incredibly useful for everyone at this point, and we had almost no say with, not say, but almost no direction on that. It just kind of happened. And that a lot of that fell out because of kind of the RFC process, the team process, the governance structure that we had set up. So we had kind of, once we had enabled all the community members to kind of be able to do this, then those who were actually motivated to do so had a clear track of how to do that, and they were able to do that. So that was specifically, Rust didn't have unions like we had in C, and that's actually very important for F5, very small organizations. So we didn't really need it at the very beginning, but nowadays we actually have full-fledged unions just like there are in C. I think in terms of helping that go to another project or kind of helping other projects as well, I think the harder bit for me at least is kind of making sure there's not a lot of like closed and tribal knowledge per se, but rather it's kind of what you work on, how you work on it, how people can propose a feature. It's all very open. It's all very accessible. So the idea that if someone is motivated and someone has the technical expertise to do something, they should be able to do it in their project. They shouldn't have to go through layers and layers of approval. It shouldn't be like some very convoluted thing, because every layer you have to kind of like, oh, well, now you have to set up a new email client, now you have to go sign up for a mailing list, now you have to sign up for 6 more accounts. Every time you do that, you're going to lose some percentage of people that are just like, all right, I don't care at this point. So making it as streamlined as possible is probably the most helpful thing that I can recommend.
Yeah, so I can speak to a few of the experiences that I've had that I thought were really successful, and sort of designs that patterns we follow to encourage the community. So one of the things that I find is really valuable when you're sort of promoting a project is just to continually keep it in front of people's eyes. Seeing a project being talked about once, will tell you that's a cool project. But if you see it over and over and over, even if you're not that interested, you'll realize that there's something going on there. So with Rust, we're always trying to surface information and make sure it's out there, people see what's going on, that there are things going on, and that there's activity and you can be part of it. So one example, an early example of what we did to start generating that kind of enthusiasm is a weekly newsletter we had called This Week in Rust.
And this is just a really simple thing. And we took the idea from Linux Weekly News, if you're aware of it. It's a long-standing newsletter about Linux. It's just beautiful, really awesome technical content. This Week in Rust is not nearly as good as Linux Weekly News, but it turned out to be just an amazing, amazing, valuable thing. So the way we started This Week in Rust was, I said, like, wouldn't it be cool if we did this? I made a forum post. Like, this would be a great thing for us to have. And somebody else said, yeah, that'd be great. So he went and set it up, and for like a month or two, he was very enthusiastic about running it. But then he kind of lost interest, and it kind of fell by the wayside. And I knew this was important, and I knew it was strategically valuable for us to have this thing out there and generate interest. So I took up the mantle for that for like 6 months, just every week doing an hour or two of work to put together this newsletter and put it out there. People responded to it, and we're thankful that it existed. And the thing that I learned from that experience is that if you just keep doing something, set a precedent, then generally, oftentimes, people will see what you're doing and see, oh, that's effective. Look at how well that's working. I want to help with that. And pretty soon, just from doing it over and over and over and saying this is a thing that happens in Rust consistently, somebody said, okay, I want to be part of that too. How can I help? And so I said, oh, here's how I do this thing. Why don't you do it for a while? And today, now, several years later, we have 2 people doing the This Week in Rust newsletter, and I periodically email them and say how things are going, you're doing great. But I don't have any direct responsibility there, and I don't have any direct sort of demands on my time. And that's sort of the pattern that I like to follow when I want to get new initiatives running. Just go set the precedent, show people how it's done, and just hope it catches on. And sometimes it doesn't, and sometimes it does. But when it does, it's basically you're creating culture around your project. That's really powerful. And that's probably the sum of my thoughts at this point.
Brian didn't mention it, but This Week in X kind of started with Rust. It was like, you'll see very early on Rust, and it's proliferated to projects like basically everywhere, not just Rust, but the various open source ecosystems. Whether it's caused by literally This Week in Rust, I don't know, but you'll see it quite often nowadays.
Any other questions?
So, out of curiosity, why is it called Rust?
You're going to get this one.
The Rust team fully acknowledges that Rust is a terrible name. The original creator of Rust Creating Core named it to his preferences. At the time, my understanding, I was not quite involved yet. At the time, my understanding is that everybody around him said, Braden, this is a bad name, don't do this. And he was like, no, I like it. This is very evocative. This is metaphorical. This represents like me. And so he stuck with it. And that's kind of like, that's the original sin of Rust, basically. It's something we have to defend constantly. What Rust actually means is unclear, and purposefully so. You don't want people to make up stories or to, there's no real reason Rust is named Rust. But people have made up many stories about why it's named Rust. The original story that I heard was that Rust is supposed to be evocative of like well-worn, reliable tooling. The original pitch for Rust was basically, we're taking a bunch of old research that hasn't been exploited and pulling it into the modern era and into production. So Rust is sort of metaphorical for that process. And that's kind of the best explanation for Rust. Now, the worst explanation for Rust is that Rust is a type of fungus. People love this explanation, and I do not know why, and I try to discourage it at every opportunity. But it's sort of a meme in Rust at this point that Rust is named after a fungus. I actually received an email to the trademark email address asking for trademark permission to use the Rust logo. And this person said, I want to use this logo for my personal use because I love how evocative it is of fungus. And I love how the 5 spokes on the outside of that circle represent the 5 stages of fungal growth. And I was like, where did you get all this? So basically, Rust is a terrible name that means nothing, and you try to create back-facing justification for it constantly, and
So this was probably mentioned somewhere at some point, but I'm told that there's some kind of initiative to add lexical scoping to Rust's lifetimes. How's that going?
So I can't speak to this topic extensively, but it is going. It is under active development. Nico Matsakis, who's sort of a prime type theorist in Rust and actually invented the borrowing system, has had this on his mind for years and years, and he's continually revisiting it and coming up with new solutions that might solve the problem. And you may or may not be aware, but just last week or 2 weeks ago or so, he posted another blog post on his blog called smallcultfollowing.com. And if you care all about type theory, I highly recommend this blog. It is beautifully written for the understanding of very difficult type theory concepts. And he's got ideas for how to do non-lexical borrowing in a way that will establish without a work, and effectively being worked on. There is no ETA.
Along those lines, one recent development is that Rust is a safe language by default, but there are obviously compiler bugs, so there are a few reasons that it's not safe in some sort of situations. And it was discovered that there's an unsoundness related to lifetime checking, and non-lexical lifetimes is basically required to fix it. So it might be a little hastened. Or as in, development might be a little bit accelerated. We'll probably see it by the end of the year, would be my guess. That's a good question. So for me, at least, how I decided to go with my CS, or what to do with my CS background was, I got a couple of internships when I was in college, and I ended up just loving that kind of work. I loved working in kind of industry and kind of moving between projects and moving between companies. So I ended up deciding that I did want to go work in Silicon Valley. Like I wanted to go out to San Francisco, and I wanted to work for a company. And I didn't land in quite the right company to begin with, but Rust ended up just kind of piquing enough of my interests in terms of compilers, systems programming, all that kind of stuff, and that was the reason that I ended up choosing Rust, and then I got lucky enough to get the job as well. So as for what I wish I had, if I could go back and tell myself something. Oh, right. So actually, this is very specific to me, but I didn't take enough CS classes. I personally got a dual degree in electrical computer engineering and computer science, and I will never do electrical computer engineering in my life. And I wish I had done that. So I wish I had more time to kind of explore more CS courses while I was in college. I think basically like exploring distributed systems or networking or kind of going more in depth to like security or doing various research things like that. I kind of wish I had used my time more so to do that as opposed to just getting classes to get a thing on my diploma or something, which ends up being essentially useless nowadays.
I don't think I can speak extensively to this, but I will try to speak honestly to it. In CS, when I was in college, I didn't have a particularly enjoyable college experience. I didn't feel like I belonged there, and didn't feel like I had to go with a circle of friends. And when I left college, I didn't have much planned for myself. I just kind of felt bad in the trip. And I just took whatever job I had locally. Fortunately, one of my professors liked me and offered me a position as a research firm. And at the time, I wasn't really thinking too much about my future, honestly. It's not great, but I wasn't. I just wanted to get paid and survive. Eventually, I found my passion. I'm very, very happy about what I'm doing now. I wish I could tell you the process I took to get to that place. I don't really know. But one part of that is feeling like I'm part of something big that I believe in, and I discovered how important it is to me, at least, to believe in what I'm doing. A lot of my early jobs were just doing other people's stuff. But with Rust, I came in and I understood the vision, I had my own vision, and I felt like I was contributing to it. And honestly, that is kind of one of the great things about Rust, is you can feel like you're part of that vision. And that's very valuable to me. It's hard for me to imagine going on to another career where I don't have that sort of gratification. As to what I wish I had learned, it took me a really, really, really long time to mature emotionally. And as I said before, the most important thing in your professional career is being able to interact effectively and positively with other people. Because that's going to just like multiply your skills and abilities to be able to have that circle of people that you work with effectively. So I wish that I had realized much, much earlier in my life how important health is, just physical and mental health, and keeping yourself, well-grounded and able to understand what's important in maintaining relationships.
Hi, I had a couple questions. One is, how large was the core team again of Rust? 7?
I think.
Okay. Does Rust pay the core team?
6 out of 7. No, 5 out of 7. Yeah, so the answer is no. We have the intent of the core team, kind of the intent of the governance structure is to not purely be Mozilla. We've always wanted to have Rust eventually become independent of Mozilla itself. Mozilla is obviously the largest financial backer behind Mozilla, paying full-time employees, paying for the infrastructure, paying for those kinds of costs. But the idea is we do want community members. So we have a couple of community members on the core team itself, and all of the various teams around the governance also have plenty of community members as well, which are not paid full-time by Mozilla. Although every team does have at least one member paid by Mozilla.
So they're mostly funded by Mozilla?
At the moment, Rust remains mostly funded by Mozilla. Not entirely, but the vast majority of the money that actually feeds into Rust development is from Mozilla still. And if you don't mind, I want to say another thing about the issue of paid staff and the governance structure. An issue we run into here all the time is that the very best people, the people that we want to climb up that ladder of the Rust governance team structure, end up being people that we want to hire. And it's important to us to, basically for perception's sake, to have a community project where there are legit community members in high positions of authority in the team. And this is actually a serious sort of social political problem for us. Like, can we hire this guy and remove another community member from the Rust governance structure?
Yeah, how do you decide that?
Well, it helps that our budget is quite limited, so we don't have to decide a lot. I would say that that specific decision about whether to hire somebody and what community perception will be, generally the needs of the project technically win that argument. Like, we will make that decision that we need to hire this person, and we will explain it as best as we can, and that people are going to be unhappy about it. Along these same lines, even more tricky problem for us with the structure of the Rust teams is in diversity. It's a constant struggle to make the Rust diversity story appealing and sort of in line with what people's expectations are these days. It's just a fact that many of the Rust developers are white males, and if you look at the core team, it's mostly like, it's all males. That might be it's all white males in the core team. That's, the optics of that are very, very bad. Not for everybody, perhaps not even for the majority, but certain groups of people look at our the page that shows who the Rust team is, and they see, this is white males, this is a problem.
Mm-hmm. Is there any attempt to change it?
Oh yes. There's definitely lots of attempts to change it. And we, culturally, we try to encourage a culture of inclusivity and diversity. And I think we legitimately have one, but there are still large demographics that still aren't coming in the volume we might expect compared to other languages. But I just want to say one thing about the political aspects of the team structure of diversity is that, like, although we don't have to think too hard about how to hire somebody, actually changing the core team is politically very, very, very difficult because the decisions around that are largely political. And we have to think, like,
what makes those decisions? Like, decide.
Core team basically makes those decisions. In general, issues of governance in Rust are the responsibility of the core team. And that is, to a large extent, the prime responsibility of the core team.
Cool. Thanks, guys, for coming. Thanks to our panel for talking to us. I think up next is Nerve, which starts in 10 minutes, and they're assembling out in the atrium to go to Kenny Gym. So if you're interested in that, I would head there.
If you have more Rust questions, we're in the other building in room 2015. We'll be there for the rest of the day. So feel free to drop by and ask us anything. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.